so many different ways. So let me give an example. And when Saul was anointed by Samuel, it was a secret anointing. No one is supposed to know because he wasn't yet a king. And the Philistines will kill him if he was a king. And God would say, well, go down the road and you'll see a band of prophets. So the prophets are already there before anything to Christianity. Who are these? Prophets, there were all kinds of prophets. There were people who hired guns. They could be, you might say, a bit like today's lawyers who will speak on your behalf. Whatever you pay them, they'll say it. Now, some time ago, someone asked me about this. He says, I was a barrister at law. How does a barrister work in court? What is your function? And I thought about it, and I think it's accurate to say, actually, we don't know a lot about anything. In fact, we know nothing about everything. But if you give us enough time, in 2 weeks, I can learn my client's work. I can represent my client so well that I can even persuade myself that I'm my client. And it's okay, because I represent my client. I'm the spokesman for the client. Very often, a person may be a very good businessman, but in court, he could be tongue-twisted. He doesn't know the vocabulary. He may say the wrong things and annoy the judge, and there goes the case. He may say the wrong thing and draw attention from the jury, and there goes the right case. And that's why they always say, even for lawyers, the worst kind of client you can have, or a lawyer can have, is when a lawyer represents himself. Never do that. So even if a lawyer is charged with a crime, or it's a civil case, he always gets another lawyer to represent him. Why? What is the lawyer's work? The good lawyer, he controls his emotions so well that he can represent the best case for the client at a time of great crisis, and he can have a reasoned way to judge what to do. If you are being charged with a crime or you're in court, it gets very, very emotional and you can't do a good job. So that's what, in a sense, the prophets do. They represent God to human beings for the purpose of representing human beings back to God. Ecstatic prophets were one of the earliest types, and they started as the pagan prophets. And Saul began to know them. And what else? Who else is involved in ecstatic prophecy? Believe it or not, David. And sometimes it expresses itself in dance. Sometimes they lose their body. In fact, there's a case in the Old Testament as well, when you read about it, and he's stripped naked and he lies on the floor. And you thought, that guy's crazy. Well, yeah, actually, that's what happens. And sometimes the Spirit will go into him. And then you have cases sometimes in the Old Testament itself where a king will send people to fight his enemies. And how does God protect the enemies of the king? By casting a spell so that the people can become ecstatic. And you find this in the Old Testament as well. And when they become ecstatic and they prophesy, now they can't do the military work. So the guy is useless. Then he sends another platoon of soldiers. And again, God gives the soldiers to prophesy, and then they prophesy. And remember, ecstatic prophecy is almost like they went out of their minds, so they can't kill. And then they send a third one, and then he went himself to kill. So don't think of the word prophecy as always a positive thing. In the early days, prophecy was one way that God would destroy your enemies by bringing them out of their minds. Then this out of the mind concept became a positive aspect, where later on in the Old Testament, it was seen as a good thing. Now, you'll also notice in the case of and Saul and David, the Bible tells us that he had a mental issue. He had a problem. And the Spirit went to him, and he was very troubled, right? A troubled spirit. And then it says, and David came and played the lyre, and the music settled him, and he became better. Now, these are all ecstatic prophecies. We're all talking about this very same event. Even today, as I speak to you, Old Testament scholars studying this remain a bit puzzled, because it is so difficult to go back that far in history to see how the words were used and why they used this way. And it's very curious. So here's the interesting thing, and a warning to all of us. In case you think you know all about prophecy, do your homework and you'll be very humble. We still don't fully understand how far back it goes, why they're like that. Now let's come to the second type, the pre-classical or non-writing prophets. The prophets that we know of, but they never wrote anything in their own name. It was written about them. So when you see Elijah and Elisha, Nathan and Gad, and Ahijah, Micaiah, Huldah, Hananiah, and Huldah, by the way, is a woman prophet. These are the prophets where we don't get much about what they specifically said. We also get about their lives and who they were, the character of Elijah and Elisha. Then we come to the classical or the writing, and sometimes they call it the literary prophets. Amos, Hosea, the 12 prophets you find in the minor prophets. Ezekiel, Jeremiah. These are the writing prophets. And then you've got the cultic prophets. And one example are the 400 prophets of Baal. So prophets are not all good guys. They are bad guys, okay? And sometimes they're good guys who went bad. You've got it in Jeremiah, Hananiah. They both gave competing predictions of what Yahweh would say, and then God comes and says one is wrong and one is right. And then you've got the professional prophets, the bands of traveling prophets who move from town to town. Now, what are they like? They're like traveling minstrels. But instead of singing, if you pay them money, they will go into a trance and they will tell you what they think the Lord is saying. Because in those days, there wasn't just one God. There were many, many kinds of God. And when they say the Lord, the word for Lord is Baal. So Baal means Lord. There are many lords. There are many Baals. What was the distinction in Israel? The Israelites' teaching was all these Baals are fake. They're bogus. There's only one true God, and this God is Yahweh. And how do we know that? And then they have the competitions. They have Elijah, competition against the 400 Baals, right? I'm going to throw water on it, and I want to see whether you can light a fire and burn the meat. And then he even makes fun of them. And when nothing happened, they were dancing and dancing. They went to an ecstatic trance, and nothing happened. And he said, maybe your God is asleep. Wake him up. He makes fun of them like that. So these are different Baals, prophets. Now, what about seer? Samuel is an example of a seer. A seer is someone who has special powers, and they can see beyond this time zone. They can see into the future. They can see in the back. They can see things that are insightful things, which means if they see you and they talk to you, you can see what they are on the outside, but you can't sense their heart. They can sense what's on the inside, and this was Samuel. And Samuel was given very special, very distinct, time-constrained gifts so that when he was choosing who is going to be the first king, or Saul, it was that sort of sight where he could say, nope, this is a wrong son. We want one son, not this son, not that son, but that son. When he came to choose David, same thing. It wasn't the big son. It was, there's someone missing. Do you have any more sons? That's a seer at work. He knows there's another son. And then he says, yes, one son, but I don't think you want him. He's a small guy, and he's up there taking care of the sheep. Bring him to me. And that's a seer, seeing beyond the human judgments. You've got men of God. Elijah and Elisha are people like that. But you see, their term was not prophets. Are you a man of God, they will say. Now, what do they mean when they say man of God? They don't always mean Yahweh. They mean any God. So there were people traveling all over Canaan or Palestine or what we call Israel today. Remember, this was a time when you can't really trust the kings because what the kings do, even Solomon and David and Saul, it was predicted by the prophets. The kings will take your women and bring them into their harem. They will take your son and send them as soldiers into the war. Kings are not necessarily good guys. So and this was a time before policemen, before they had the military to take care of you. So everyone who could afford it, they wanted a man of God. And very often, they will adopt a man of God as a father, an older man who's traveling around. It's like a holy man in India. And you'll see in the Old Testament, you read about it. They'll say, are you a man of God? Yes, I'm a man of God. And if you like it very much, you say, can I adopt you? Now, it sounds very strange to us. You're adopting a man of God. What they're saying is, can I give you a permanent job? Now, you'll find the same analog in cowboy movies where the lonesome cowboy, he moves from town to town, and then when he needs money, he goes to a ranch, and he says, do you need a hand? I'm a good hand. I can wrestle, and I can do that. He says, yeah. And then if he's really good, he'll say, do you want a full-time job? Take care of my ranch. And he says, yes or no. And the same thing happens in prophecy. Now, why is it in the ancient Near East, they thought it was a very important thing? Because there's so much uncertainty. They never know when the crops will fail. They never know when the crops are good and people come to raid them. Bandits may come. They never know when the earth will open up, earthquakes, and everything goes up. So this uncertainty was such, they were looking for an insurance hedge, some sort of insurance policy. It was worth paying money for a man of God because the man of God had divination powers. What is divination? The word divination, it comes from the word divine, which means you have access to God. Finally, you've got the interpreters of dreams and visions, and Daniel is a classical one.